Hi, and welcome to AmalgamNation presents World of Lorecraft, Elfcraft Edition, Part 3, High Elf Lore. The High Elves are Quel'Dorai, children of the noble Bert in Darnassian, and High Elves in Thalassian are a race descended from the highborn Night Elves who left Kalimdor and settled in the Eastern Kingdoms, founding Quel'Thalas. The High Elves were once a significant force on the continent, but in recent times their numbers have been dramatically reduced. By 90% of their race was slaughtered in the Third War. Following this, another 90% of the survivors changed their name to Blood Elves in remembrance of their fallen brethren and no longer consider themselves High Elven. Around 25,000 true High Elves remain, most of whom cling to the Alliance, trying to restore the glory of their once great people. The ancient origin of the High Elves is a legacy of tragedy and conflict, a series of events that has profoundly affected the development of the Quel'Dorai. The High Elves are a stark contrast to their nocturnal cousins, the Night Elves. Embracing the light of the sun and forsaking the night, the High Elves are the descendants of the very elves who served Queen Azshara in the time of the Well of Eternity. The Quel'Dorai regard the High Elven penchant for using arcane magic as careless, akin to a foolish child playing with fire. The schism that separates the Highborn Elves and the Night Elves is rather ancient, once so ancient that no amount of diplomacy or offerings of peace can soothe the scars of history. The High Elves, however, have had generations separating them from the Night Elves and no longer care for the past. Problems between the two races are usually clashes of personality, as neither tries overly hard to interact. The arrogance of the High Elves led to the War of the Ancients and ultimately to the downfall of the Golden Age of Elven civilization. Through the reckless use of arcane magic, the High Elves allowed darkness to seep into the world and corrupt Azeroth. They used the genetic phenomenon that modern elves face as testament to their views. Arcane magic is a powerful drug to the High Elves, and it can be a lure to a dark and perilous path, yet too many wield it as if they were doing no harm, and few but the oldest and most sage can recall the true reasons why the use of such magic is a dangerous and potentially damning practice. Regardless of the risks, some High Elves press onwards to revel in the euphoria and power that the use of magic brings them. The High Elves are a tragic example of a race in decline. Their centuries of arcane practice have led them into an ever-tightening downward spiral. Now there are few true Quel'Dorai left. Most have gone with Kael'thas Sunstrider to become the Blood Elves, and in doing so have allied with the sworn enemies of elvenkind, the Naga. Now the scant remaining Quel'Dorai are typically those who have embraced the light and seen past the powers of arcane magic and darkness. Distrusted by almost all of the races, the remaining High Elves are pariahs in an age when there is little left for them but a life of mistrust and woe. High Elf history. When the ancient elves adopted Druidism, they outlawed the practice of arcane magic. The use of its dangerous powers was punishable by death. However, many Highborn survived the Sundering and grew restless. They suffered from magical withdrawal, and approximately 7,300 years before the invasion of the Horde through the Dark Portal, they spoke against Malfurion, Stormrage, and the Druids. Datramar Sunstrider, the leader of this movement, declared the Druids cowards for refusing to wield the arcane. Malfurion and the Druids warned the Highborn that any use of magic would be punishable by death, yet in an attempt to protest the Druids' law, Datramar and his followers unleashed a terrible magical storm upon Ashenvale. The Druids, however, could not bring themselves to put so many of their kin to the death, so they decided to exile the reckless Highborn from their lands. Sunstrider and his followers boarded a number of specially crafted ships and set sail upon the seas. By now the Highborn were glad to be rid of their conservative cousins and free to practice the arcane with impunity. None knew what lay beyond the Maelstrom, but they eventually found the Eastern Kingdoms and formed their own magical realm. They abandoned the concepts of Elune and nocturnal activity, embracing the sun instead. They would soon become known as the Quel'Dorai, the High Elves. Sunstrider led the High Elven fleets across the world for many long years. Their goal was to find places of considerable lay power for them to build their new homeland. After landing on the Lordaeron continent, they moved inland and formed a settlement in the Tirsfell Glades. After a few years, however, many were driven insane. The belief at the time was that something evil slept beneath the glades, so the High Elves abandoned the region and moved northwards. Around this time they had become completely severed from the life-giving energy of the Well of Eternity. This meant that they were vulnerable to the elements and had not received immortality from Nosdormu and the World Tree. Over the generations they had shrunk in height, their skin had become a peach hue similar to most dwarves and humans, and their hair golden. The elves soon discovered primitive man and the well-established forest trolls of Zulaman under the Amani Empire. The trolls posed a great threat to their society, and the elves soon grew to hate them, the two fighting each other whenever they met. After many years, the High Elves discovered a special land in the northern forests which suited them, and founded the city of Silvermoon and the kingdom of Quel'Thalas. To sate their hunger for great magical power, the High Elves created the sacred Sunwell here. It became the source of their power as the Well of Eternity had been in Kalimdor. Although the Sunwell was much weaker and the elves were forewarned of the dangers. As the High Elves became more powerful, they cast an enchantment on the forest that bade Quel'Thalas in eternal springtime, in defiance of the kingdom's location on the extreme north of the continent. From that point on, all High Elves had access to the Sunwell's powers from anywhere on Azeroth. Over time, the High Elves came to regard the Sunwell's waters as holy. Magic became part of their genes centuries before, but the Sunwell's unique energies became part of them acutely. Unfortunately, they would learn that Quel'Thalas was founded near an ancient ruined city of religious significance to the Trolls. The Trolls began to attack the elven settlements en masse in retaliation. Although the Amani outnumbered them 10 to 1, the Elves utilised magic to its fullest effect and defeated their enemies. The convocation of Silvermoon, wary of the Keldari's warnings, employed a series of monolithic runestones to erect a protective barrier around Quel'Thalas, which allowed them to continue their magic without attracting the Burning Legion's attention on the astral plane, as well as control physical access to their lands. Soon Quel'Thalas became a shining monument to elven prowess. It was crafted in the same style as the halls of Kalimdor, with the addition of integrated magic and a brighter colour scheme. Although they did not worship it, a great respect was maintained for nature. The High Elves were careful to interweave their cities and architecture with their natural surroundings, creating a truly beautiful and tranquil land. For nearly 4,000 years the High Elves remained at peace, but while the Elves consolidated their nation, the Amani plotted revenge. 2,800 years before the First War, they unleashed their reformed massive army and their own breed of magic upon Quel'Thalas. The Troll Wars ignited. While the High Elves had the more powerful magic, they were vastly outnumbered. Suffering loss after loss, the Keldari turned to the men of Arthur for support. In exchange for the elven instruction of 100 humans in arcane magic, the two formed a military alliance, and together they finally crushed the Amani, an empire that had endured for more than 20,000 years. Humans and High Elves have cultivated their coalition ever since, eventually co-founding the mage city of Dalaran and ultimately the Alliance. The High Elves also established relations with the Ironforged dwarves to the far south when the human nations of Gilneas and Alterac encountered them more than 1,000 years later. Initially, the two races had no special bond and tended to distrust one another. When allied, it was through their common ties to the humans. Yet, 230 years before the First War, the Dwarven race split into three factions. The Wildhammer clan desired to open up trade with the High Elves, considered a taboo at the time, and would serve as one of the catalysts for their civil war. When it ended, the Wildhammers became close allies of the Elves, and the two races became united through a mutual appreciation for nature and other cultural similarities. They would soon become each other's closest friends within the alliance. For nearly 3,000 years following the Troll Wars, Quel'Thalas remained at peace. The Orcish horde came through a portal from the world of Draenor and ignited the First War. Though the High Elves helped to defend on a small level, the kingdom of Stormwind fell. After the humans were defeated and fled north through Khazmodan, the dwarves sent emissaries to meet with the High Elves and humans to discuss the threat of the horde. when the humans proposed an alliance of their 7 nations, the Wildhammer and Ironforged dwarves, the gnomes and the High Elves. The elves were honour bound to join it due to their ancestral connection with the former Arathi tribe of humans, of whom Anduin Lothar was the last pure-blooded scion. Under Anasterian Sunstrider, they were the least enthusiastic of the alliance and put forth only a token army. Meanwhile, the Horde had brought ogres into Azeroth and allied with the goblins and forest trolls. They then turned their sights on the north, launching the Second War. The Orcs' northern campaign, in which the trolls were meant to take back their ancestral homes from the High Elves, managed to burn down the borderlands of Quel'Thalas, slaughtering many High Elves in the process and corrupting the runestone at Caer Darrow. This enraged Silvermoon, which promptly pledged its full support to the war. The Horde eventually splintered under internal political pressure, and the Alliance charged southwards to crush it. The Second War was won. In the aftermath, some High Elves blamed the humans' poor leadership for the burning of their forests. King Tyrannus of Lordaeron reminded them that nothing of Quel'Thalas would have remained if not for the hundreds of humans that gave their lives to defend it. But nevertheless, the High Elves largely abandoned the alliance. Illyria Windrunner, sister to Sylvanas, and a cadre of her elven rangers remained loyal to the alliance high command, but they were eventually lost on the other side of the Dark Portal. Her sister Veriza also advocated continued support to the alliance after the grim Batal incident, but Anasterian was not swayed. It should be noted that although the High Elves retreated from the alliance, a large number of them remained in Dalaran and were loyal to the alliance through the Kirin Tor. Years later, the Scourge came forth. Its commander, Artus Menethil, obliterated the leading nation of Lordaeron and then turned their sights on Quel'Thalas. Their goal was to revive a human man named Kel'Thuzad, who could summon the demon lord Archimonde into Azeroth. To do this, they required a source of considerable ley magic and chose the Sunwell. The High Elves were still recovering from their grievous injuries at the hands of the Horde, but faced the Scourge in battle regardless. This time there would be no human army to rescue them. The High Elven army, led by the Ranger General Sylvanas Windrunner, made counterattacks every time the Scourge advanced. Despite their tactics and magic, the elves were pushed back from the outer to the inner elf gates. Finally, Artus and his army, as well as new banshees including Sylvanas, advanced on Silvermoon and crushed the defenders. The Sunwell was used to resurrect Kel'Thuzad and filled with evil in the process. The Scourge then set about to commit genocide on a massive scale. Only about 10% of the entire race survived. Some of them were lucky enough to be away from their home at the time. Many were housed in Dalaran and others had already fled with Jaina, but the majority of them survived only by defending themselves or hiding. Soon Dalaran, with the second greatest concentration of High Elves, was destroyed as well, although this defeat was swift and no genocide would occur here. Outside the original battle, many elves died afterward from bandits that came to sift through the wreckage. The remaining High Elves throughout the continent were scattered and clung to the alliance for protection, until Kael'thas began to organise them by reclaiming every last elf on the eastern continents. Some had already left with Jaina Proudmoore to form the city-state of Terramore in Kalimdor before the destruction of Quel'Thalas. These elves had mostly severed ties with Quel'Thalas prior to its fall, and keep the name of High Elf to this day. They take 2 of the 7 seats on the ruling council that advises Lady Jaina and play a key role in the governing of the city-state. Occasionally ships have come from Lordaeron, bringing more of their people to the diverse city, although some have begun to migrate back to Quel'Thalas since the alliance is incapable of healing their addiction and ending their agony. All high-ranking High Elves in the alliance have ready access to arcane currents to feed upon, which keeps them from feeling the same level of agony as their brethren. For example, a large moonwell, a fount of magical energies, sits in the Park of Stormwind, open for all to observe and bathe. The elven body automatically absorbs energy from the area around it, and such a high saturation that rivals the Well of Eternity's waters supplies their demand nicely. Also, a small unit of High Elven Rangers under the command of Ranger Captain Filari Swiftarrow and the zealous Scarlet Crusades together battled against the undead. A large statue in honour of the capable elven leader has been erected in the Scarlet Monastery. Some High Elves live in the hinterlands and some High Elves took refuge in Zulaman. Several bands of High Elves survivors from Quel'Thalas fled south and now wander throughout the forest. Those who stay one step ahead of the trolls survive. Those who do not are dead and probably eaten by the cannibalistic trolls. Scourge patrols hunting the elven refugees also stalk through the land. The High Elves of Quel'Thalas renamed themselves the Blood Elves and have since rebuilt the city per the instructions of Prince Keltus. Due to the unreasonable orders of the Alliance leader Garthos, Kael's people were left without sufficient troop strength and were forced to ally themselves with the Naga to survive. Garthos, who had expressed his bias against Kael previously, found out about the Naga incident and took this opportunity to sentence Kael's people to death for this treason, and the elves were locked in the prison under Dalaran awaiting execution. Prince Keltus and Lady Vash, handmaid of the Naga Queen, rescued Kael's people, and together they fled to Outland. They soon joined Illidan in Outland, and he in turn taught them how to sate their hunger for magic by feeding on alternative sources. He has suffered this addiction as an immortal for 10,000 years, cut off from the Well of Eternity. The Blood Elves began to hunt and use demons in order to steal their powers. Although they do not worship them, they merely use them as tools. The Blood Elves have situated themselves in Outland and Keltas and account for the vast majority of the High Elves' previous population. Those few elves of the Alliance who have remained as High Elves have become enemies to their once brothers in arms. The Alliance High Elves ended up making up the majority of the Silver Covenant. The Blood Elves who did not travel with Keltus to Outland have allied themselves with the Horde, and through their connections to the Banshee Queen Sylvanas Windrunner, leader of the Forsaken and one-time Ranger General of Quel'Thalas. Although the Blood Elves harbour very little trust for the Horde, they also have come to hate much of the Alliance, humans and to a lesser extent the dwarves. In particular, their relationship with their ancestor race, the Night Elves, is not flourishing, but they are not dire enemies either, as distance between their locations has meant less contact between each other and fewer situations to arise that would cause fighting. Some of the Blood Elves led to Outland by Keltas, including Kael himself, eventually broke away from those left in Silvermoon. The Silvermoon Elves, who considered themselves a part of the Horde, began to oppose Keltas as disturbing new facts came to light. Illidan had gone mad, and Keltas had abandoned him and sworn allegiance to the demons of the Burning Legion. In addition, the separation this caused between Keltas' group and the Horde, a large army of elves who had followed Keltas to Outland, defected and joined the Shatar. This faction, the Scryers, is not aligned with the Horde nor the Alliance. High Elves are currently found primarily scattered throughout the human societies, thereby being forced to rely on the hospitality of the younger race. This dependency has resulted in some High Elves vigorously trying to find a new homeland, with possibly a new source of magic. The status of their Blood Elven counterpart has resulted in them being shunned by most of the Alliance, particularly the Night Elves. Human cities hold the highest population density of High Elves, Dalaran having the highest concentration, where many are a part of the Kirin Tor and the Silver Covenant. While the Silver Covenant is openly hostile towards their Blood Elven kin, the Kirin Tor prefers to stay neutral to both the Alliance and the Horde. This will later change when Jaina Proudmoore pledges the Kirin Tor to the Alliance. The High Elves even maintain a presence in Lordaeron. Ranger Lord Hawkspear and Aurora Skycaller maintain a vigil over the eastern Plaguelands, sheltering their people within the intact Elven Lodge there. Deep within the hinterlands, the High Elves of the Quell Danel Lodge have their sights set on forming diplomatic alliances with other members of the Alliance. Remnants of the Alliance Expedition's High Elven Ranger cadre are currently stationed at the sizable Illyrian stronghold in Outland. After the defeat of Kil'jaeden, the Blood Elves took the Sunwell back with the help of the Shattered Sun offensive, and the High Elves were allowed to share the Sunwell. Captain Auric Sunchaser from the Alliance Expedition Rangers represents the High Elves at the well itself. The Blood Elves and the High Elves are still openly hostile to each other. The destruction of Terramore by the Horde resulted in the deaths of a number of High Elves. This led to greater mistrust and tension among the High Elves and Blood Elves, in particular the Silver Covenant, who are led by Varisa Windrunner. Her husband Ronan was among those killed. High Elf population. The High Elves are a people without a home, now dwelling in the lands of humans after the forces of Prince Arthas and the Lich Kel'Thuzad destroyed the city of Silvermoon. Now most of the remaining true High Elves dwell among humans, living in small communities and villages. Daros Moonlands can be found in Darnassus, and he is so far the only High Elf inside. Many of the High Elves journeyed with Prince Kael'thas, the last leader of the Sunstrider dynasty, to join with Illidan and the Naga. These elves eschewed their High Elven ancestry in search for some way to placate their magical addiction and become the Blood Elves, and now use alternative magical sources to safeguard their lives. The destruction of the Sunwell has forced the High Elves into decline, causing them to doubt the future of their once proud race and drawing animosity toward them from other races who feel that the High Elves have betrayed the Alliance. Most of the High Elves have placed themselves under a self-imposed exile, ashamed of the damage that they have wrought upon the world of Lordaeron with their abuse of arcane magic. While humans still accept the High Elves because of the aid that both races provided each other during the most recent attacks of the Burning Legion, reinforcing the same bond that they had in both the Troll Wars and the Second War, many of the other races will only deal with the High Elves if absolutely necessary. This is especially true after the acts of Kael'thas Sunstrider. The Night Elves in particular do not care for the company of High Elves, as they have personal memories of the war that spawned them, and in some cases can be openly hostile toward their sun-blessed brethren. The passing of time may heal these wounds, but the use of arcane magic will always draw a rift between these two breeds of elf. High Elf appearance. High Elves stand slightly taller than humans do. A High Elf is usually a little over 6 feet in height and weighs between 100 to 175 pounds depending on gender. The elves are slim with sharp symmetrical features, often an exaggeration of perfect beauty. The High Elves are uniformly fair in complexion with white to flaxen coloured hair. Their eyes are incredibly intense in colour, seeming to glow with an inner light. While many High Elves have blue or green eyes, violet and red are not unheard of. The structure of High Elven eyes shows that they are generally like humans with a pupil and iris surrounded by white, but tend to be able to see much farther than humans are capable. The lifespan of a High Elf is several hundred years. They reach adulthood at 110 years of age, and they venerable age at roughly 350 years. A few may reach venerable age at roughly 350 years, with maximum lifespan between 354 and 390 years, and even fewer may live as long as 2,000 years. Most High Elves, especially those of the Alliance, do not wear red or black for fear of being mistaken as Blood Elves. They have shorter ears and much smaller, lighter bodies than Night Elves. In addition, their ears usually point upwards, whereas those of the Night Elves do not. High Elves have white, red, orange, brown, black and blonde coloured hair and fair skin. Most have brilliantly intense sapphire coloured eyes that glow, at least in World of Warcraft. In World of Warcraft, High Elves have blue sapphire glowing eyes, but have more variation according to lore, including green eyes. The Blood Elves have only green emerald glowing eyes to show their magic addiction and their newly acquired addiction to fel magic. Blood Elves and High Elves are for the most part the same race in terms of underlying physical biology. However, Blood Elves have glowing green eyes and their hair and skin are much darker or otherwise unnaturally coloured due to the absorption of fel energies during the period the Sunwell was lost. For the most part, however, they are considered separate due to cultural differences more so than because of physical ones. In World of Warcraft, the High Elves resemble Blood Elves appearance-wise. They in fact share the same model, although the High Elves have blue eyes as opposed to green eyes of Blood Elves. but their voices are more mild-mannered, like those of night elves. In the game, they use the same voices as night elves, although unsuitable lines such as Eluna Dor, Ishnu Allah, or Goddess Watch Over You are not used. Taylor Everstride at Lyrian's Stronghold even says somewhat bemusedly, "No, don't feel bad, I get that a lot. I'm a high elf, not a blood elf. Don't worry, I won't suck the magic out of you." However, other than greeting voices, high elves and blood elves do not appear to share similar voice emotes in-game, particularly during combat. Before the World of Warcraft The Burning Crusade, in-game high elves used modified night elf models. High elven culture. It would not quite be correct to say that the high elves rejoined the Alliance. To many high elves, they never left it. Nevertheless, they are often aloof and distant from their allies. They keep to themselves and enjoy wandering forests alone or in small groups. They also maintain the Quell de Nil Lodge, an outpost of the hinterlands which pursues their diplomatic interests, and Quell Lithian in the eastern Plaguelands near the gateway to round Quell Talas. High elves in Stormwind copied the human style of long-sleeved tunics, billowy trousers and leather boots. Many high elves avoid wearing red clothing as to dissociate themselves from blood elves. They have also set aside a day of mourning for high elves to remember the destruction of Dalaran with their human friends. High elves were once strong worshippers of the holy light, but this has died down as many have rejected it in favour of arcane magic. Although after the invasion of the Scourge and the break-off from the Blood Elves, many have looked to the light, they do so loosely and are much less devout than humanity. High Elven priests are common. The High Elves have made significant contributions to this evolving religion, which originated from human cults. Even a few High Elves have become paladins without the help of magic, like the Blood Elves. High Elves have also developed advanced destroyer ships and used them in the Second War. High Elves who embrace the path of religion take on the mantle of the Holy Light, sharing the same fate as dwarves and humans. While this philosophy does not penetrate deeply into High Elven society, those who do follow the path of the Holy Light are much more approachable than most. Many also take on a druid-like philosophy regarding the world and nature, the difference being that the High and Blood Elves' view of magic as being an integral part of the universe, as it was created by the Titans and is as natural as nature itself. The Well of Eternity formed naturally on Azeroth and created the elves in the first place. Ironically, during the Second War, Milan mentions his devotion to a pantheon of gods and not a creator god. The Alliance that time was monotheistic, believing in one god, with ancients, old gods, or titans not mentioned. It is unknown whether this belief was constrained to Milan himself, or whether the polytheism was predominantly shared among people of his race. The pantheon may have included night elf deities too, though night elves weren't mentioned until Warcraft 3. High elves are proficient in archery, divine and arcane magic, as well as swordsmanship. They use guard towers for defense, and their armies take advantage of their natural strengths and typically serve supporting roles when working with other races. The High Elves had a special affinity for dragonhawks before the Scourge attacked Quel'Thalas. The dragonhawks would often serve as flying mounts for the elves, but since the High Elves abandoned their homeland, they have had to live without these creatures, who remain in the hands of the Blood Elves. All High Elves, regardless of class, status or upbringing, are addicted to magic, and all have some small proficiency in it. Unlike Blood Elves who succumb to it, High Elves actively fight their addiction, and are required to meditate at least an hour every day to maintain personal control. The High Elves are not proud of this addiction and take pains to keep it a secret. Being close to Moonwells will satiate the addiction, as will the use of certain magical items, though it should be noted Night Elves do their best to keep High Elves away from the well, and magical objects that provide the same results are rare. If a High Elf resorts to feeding off something else to sate the addiction, then they cross the line from High Elf to Blood Elf. Contrary to popular belief, magical addiction is not fatal in and of itself. The only elves who have actually died from withdrawal were either elderly, very young, or already ill. Some have found a way to block the symptoms of withdrawal by the use of Sunwell rings. High Elf names. The past is a burden to the High Elves, yet they maintain naming rituals that are millennia old. Many of the names of elven priests and heroes have become the names used for elves in modern times. The High Elves share a connection with the sun that is quite prevalent in their choice of family names. Some name examples are for males, Mariel, Ataniar, Anandor, Tharama, and Malanior. Female names include Anariel, Freya, or Freja, Freja, pronounce it whatever way you want, Driana, Coria, Alanasori, Melanion, and Azshara. Family names include Bowstrider, Dawnblade, Lightbringer, Morning Ray, and Suntreader. Thank you for listening. As always, remember, play to game and game to play.